kind of Scottish lineup. Well done, the recording has started. We're joined by Kay Guccione from Glasgow Caledonian, who is a Senior Lecturer in Academic Development, by Keith Smith from the University of the Highlands and Islands, who has the excellently alliterative Professor of Pedagogy in his title. And then we're also joined by Alex Walker, who is Professional Development and Recognition Lead at University of Highlands and Islands, and Alex and Keith are going to be doing a panel. What we're going to try and do is we will have Kay speaking first for her sort of slot, and then we'll have Keith and Alex speaking, but we're going to try and have some time at the end so that we can actually have some discussion, and it'll be interesting to see what threads we can pull out across all presentations. There will be a prize for the best thread, a prize that will be very virtual and as yet not thought of, but for who can draw the threads. But to me, just looking at the abstracts, I think we'll be hearing and thinking about how we are supporting our staff and mentoring them in different ways. So Kay, off you go, take it away.
How is that? Can everyone see slides? Yeah, good. Thumbs up. Perfect. So yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit today about the Journal of Imaginary Research, which if you've been on a sort of mailing list for a couple of years, you may have seen before and you may have thought, you know, what's that? Or that's stupid, or that's great, depending on who you are and what time of day or year or in your workload that the idea catches you. So I'm going to tell you a little bit today about sort of the pedagogical background of that, how we conceived it, what it was for, and where this journal of microfiction came from, and sort of situated within the research and academic world. You can follow that link, and I'll make sure that this is available afterwards as well. I'll pop it into the chat for you. To find the journal online, and or it's open access, it's Creative Commons license, so everything is open to you if you would like to read some of the issues today, but I'll tell you a bit about it. And then that's me on Twitter, and that's Matthew Cheeseman. He's at the University of Derby. He's a lecturer in creative writing, and if you want to find both of us on Twitter, great. If you wanted to say do things like screenshot this or take pictures and tweet along, also absolutely fine. Everything I've brought for you today is shareable, so don't worry about that. There we go. So back in 2015, I went on a workshop with Matt, and it was a sort of a micro workshop. It was about 10 minutes long, and it was how to use 2 quick creative writing techniques to kickstart writing, to kickstart a creative process. And I approached Matt, and as part of our Write Fest, International Writing Month is in November, and when I was working at Sheffield, we used to have a festival called Write Fest, and we created a workshop that fit within that festival of writing to introduce these writing concepts to anybody who was doing their doctorate, so staff member or full-time doctorates, who had self-identified as having got stuck with their writing. And this is the 2 of us. So it was me. I worked back then in research education, mentoring, and anything that was about learning through dialogue. And as I described, Matt was working across fiction and non-fiction, but drawing on lots of critical theory and cultural studies in terms of how writing is understood and positioned within learning spaces. And we put this together and we put it out there, and everybody said, why? What's this for? Is it a waste of time? What's going on? Why would I want my researchers to come to this? And to that we said, well, why not? Because creativity is something that is a property of all of us. It's a property of all writers, all researchers, all academic staff. And if we look at things like the Researcher Development Framework in section A3, we want researchers to be able to be creative. Doctorate deals in novelty, this idea of making an original contribution and of being creative. So recognise attributes that a desirable attribute that we want to build in researchers. So yeah, absolutely, why not have a go and do that? But why specifically around writing? And I'd said before that these people were stuck. They're self-identified as not making progress and finding that stressful. And in the why do you want to come to this workshop box, there was a lot of mental health words in there around anxiety and sleeplessness and worry, and people had really gotten into a relationship with writing that wasn't productive, but also wasn't favorable, wasn't a good relationship with writing. And we know from the literature that people who are writing up or writing their thesis or stuck with any large writing challenge will experience lots of different emotional as well as cognitive challenges to making progress. You know, there's those are positive and negative emotions. Writing is an emotional process, and it's also a socially situated practice. You know, the working relationships around us are important to how we understand and conceptualize and make progress with writing, but also our relationship with the writing itself. And what we also know is that if we do work specifically one-to-one around mentoring, coaching people, or putting people into writing groups, those do, and it's now well documented in lots of different ways, provide spaces for critical reflection and to support people through difficulties, to be able to plan around and through and resolve those difficulties. But it's hampered also by any out-of-date narratives of that go with PhD experiences or doctoral experiences. You know, it's supposed to be hard. You're supposed to feel as if it's a difficult time. You're supposed to strive through it. Rite of passage. This idea that it's something that's writing is something that's innate, that you're either good at or not good at, or it's something that you should do in your own time as separate from the real work of research. So what we wanted to do was try and address the fact that we want to build good relationships and habits with writing. We want to acknowledge that emotions are involved in that process, and we want to do this in a way that we are able to offer and use coaching approaches to support people. And this workshop sat within WriteFest. It also sat within a much bigger thesis mentoring program where we paired stuck writers with postdoctoral researchers who'd been trained to use different coaching techniques to support writers. And that was about matching people up. And over 16 weeks, they sat down and they acknowledged the social side of things. It was a discursive form of support. You know, it's really conversational. And it was about not the content of the thesis or any particular analyses or any particular theories that were going into that thesis, but it was about the habits of good writing. It helped to make people aware of what they were feeling in relationships they're writing. And we set it up very much in the coaching style, the humanistic background for this, which was it's non-competitive, non-judgmental, and we're going from here forward looking for a solution for the problem you're experiencing. And I just want to show you some of the same kinds of comments that came from thesis mentoring, they came from that workshop about creative writing and being stuck with a thesis. So, you know, I get up, I sit down, I should write, but I don't. I'm writing, but I'm not. I hate writing, we're not friends. You know, you really see in that next one underneath, you know, I feel sick, I get hot flushes, panic attacks, my body hurts. The real physicality of the emotion that's been experienced because of this poor relationship with writing. Waiting for inspiration, I don't know what or how to write, I go to bed, not sleep. And this idea of being stuck in a cycle with writing and stuck in this poor relationship. And then I'm not writing because my writing is poor, it disgusts me when I see it. And you know, I think that's a real feature of how we compare our first draft of something to, you know, draft 23 that we might see in something published. So this is what people were experiencing coming into thesis mentoring and coming into the workshop that we run. Going out of thesis mentoring, I won't read all these out to you, but you know, it helped me identify problematic habits or thought processes that were affecting my work. It helped me work out how I could deal with them by changing my working pattern and attitude more generally. And then I'd not realised how quickly I would improve when I actually started putting hours in. I mean, yeah, my writing improved and my actual entire life improved. And being stuck with this task, you know, you can really see that it's having a big impact on people's lives. And when we talk about, you know, what's causing mental health challenges for people doing doctorates, this is relationship with writing is something I think playing very strongly into that. And I think that not just from these comments, but from the popularity of these kinds of initiatives, which were taking in, you know, 150, 200, 250 people every year in the university. But what we weren't catching was people who felt too bad, kind of too upset, too stuck, too stumped to come to a mentoring program where they had to sit down and actually be quite honest and open and share a lot about their lives. You know, if that was too hard, those were the people who weren't signing up for this. And this is where the workshop comes into it. So we designed it to complement that, but against that background of, and that rationale of that relationship with writing. Again, it was social. We did lots of discussions. It was about recognizing emotion, all the same environmental factors, but this is very short. It wasn't a 16-week program, it was a 2-hour workshop. And what we emphasized with that was, you didn't have to bring anything, share anything. You didn't have to talk about your thesis. You didn't have to show any of your writing. You could keep it completely to yourself, and we were just going to do some writing just for fun, just to put, the enjoyment or the joy back into writing and try to kickstart a new relationship with writing. And underpinning that, we introduced ideas within those 2 hours as writing as a practice, not as something that is innate, something that you do often, frequently, and you get better at over time. We offered people devices for developing their writing. So the things that you'll know, chaining ideas, having free writing bursts where you don't stop to correct yourself, writing to specific prompts, be they written prompts, titles or headings, or we used pictures, we used a lot of images within this work. And this idea that drafting and editing your own work is part of producing good writing. Nobody is producing anything good on drafts 1 or 2, and trying to get these habits and processes of writing more explicit and more normalized for the people who got really stuck. We had a look at some devices for writing productivity, so groups and dialogue, retreats and apps that people might use as a way to, monitor or evaluate their own productivity and their own progress towards the goals they'd set for themselves. You're recognizing that not all writing is certainly about productivity, but for these people, there was a very definite product due by a very definite deadline. So we tried to help them relate it back to the thesis. We applied it to a very short piece of microfiction, which outputs a very familiar format, something everybody knew, a genre that's short, that's replicable, and that we could handle within this workshop. So the research abstract was our target for this. And what we asked people to do as the activity was, using an image as a prompt, they could bring one or we would give them one, create a 300-word imagined research abstract and a 100-word biography for an imagined researcher. And to consider how those two work together. And it was really about going through several exercises about saying, what I observe in this photo is, and what I imagine about this photo is, and gradually switching the number of observed facts for the number of imagined facts and getting that creativity going. Thinking about who the researcher was who might have done this work, and, how the name of that person and perhaps research funding that they'd won or research awards they'd won might link in with the type of research they were doing. So people coming up with fictional research institutes and prizes, absolutely amazing. And quite a lot of those are really aspirational as well. If you ask people about them, they were really doing a piece of work around their own identity as a researcher and who they would like to be, or what they felt a successful researcher looked like. So there's something there as well about not just relationship with writing, but with themselves as a researcher in the world. And we put those into the workshop, and we collected all the pieces up. I've put this here, and again, I'll make sure you get this link, because within the blog that hosts the volumes of imaginary research, there is all of the workshop. We recorded it, it's in pieces. You can download a facilitator pack, and you can download Matt talking you through all these different exercises and all these different productivity tools and techniques, and run this, cut it up and use it as Creative Commons license in any way you want to. It's right there. And what we tried to do with this was to mirror the formats, that is expected of us, and that we expect of our research, doctoral researchers as well. We're asking them to come along and get some creative thought processes going, and then after the workshop we gave them half an hour to produce a draft. So there was actually protected kind of a mini retreat there, where we said, please don't go until you've made a first draft. So it's not a case of just packing away the theoretical side of this for later use, but actually let's get it into practice now, let's produce something. And then we asked them before they went to put in some diary time the next day, 20 minutes of time, to read what they'd written the day before, to revisit that and to make some edits. And then with a buddy, people, automatically kind of in the workshop formed into 2 or 3s. We asked them to get in touch to discuss what they'd written, to suggest edits to each other, to talk about what they'd noticed, and then to edit that work again. So now on version 3. Later in the month, they came to a sort of writing power hour. They got the feedback from us as tutors, and we offered them a space to sit and finish that work. So again, this idea of coming along to get feedback on something that's not finished, but something that you can benefit from, having feedback before it goes into the next draft. And then we asked them to go away, make final edits, and submit it. And part of the deal of being published in the journal was that it must be submitted on time. Part of that deal was absolutely sticking to the deadlines. Not, if we didn't chase people, if they didn't submit something, then it didn't go in. That deadline was firm and final. And that's sometimes things that we're terrible at ourselves in academia. I think just letting deadlines roll and knowing that probably it might get shifted. But I think part of the discipline of having good practices and good habits of writing is recognizing how long it takes you to do something, deciding if you do have time to do it, and planning appropriate time and space to be able to do that. So all of these things involved, identify diary time, put it into the diary, write a specific prompt, and deliver on that promise. And what we ended up with, even though the idea behind this was that it was about the process of writing, not the product of writing, we actually did end up with, way more than 100 pieces of absolute gold, the products that came out of this. And you'll find the volumes. And I will say volume 6, which recruited during November, is 35 absolutely lovely pieces. And Matt and I have been editing it this week, and we'll launch it on Friday this week. So if you want to find our blog and subscribe to updates, as soon as that's out, it'll get delivered to you. So it's a nice little way to start the holidays, with some research related fictions, a couple of Christmassy ones in there as well. And this is what they look like. I'm not going to read all this out to you, but it's just a couple of my absolute favourites. And I'll point to the one there by Natalie. Natalie Yo wrote a really brilliant piece on how the imaginary friends that we talk to in our heads when we're thinking through things should be credited as authors on the papers that we produce, because they're part of the discourse. They're part of the thinking out loud, and they do contribute to what we write finally. In conclusion, really, our small project did not change the paradigm of thesis writing. It's still very much situated within individual research groups, research teams, supervision relationships, departments, and disciplines. That's where it sits. But what we are saying is we can help. Things like this can help to get people who are really stuck restarted on a new relationship with writing. We planted some seeds and some ideas for new habits. Whether people took them up and took off with those was up to them to embed. Really, it's not a longitudinal study, but we helped hundreds of people write just for the joy of writing, and I'm pretty proud of that, and I'm pretty pleased with what we've achieved there. I just wanted to show you some feedback from people who'd contributed to the journal. So people said, "Oh, I've laughed today. It's been a delight to imagine the data, have fun, be productive. I read this to my daughter on the phone and we just laughed together. Thank you." And then my favourite one here is that something interesting has happened here. I thought all very well, but 400 words of a story is hardly a thesis. Yet I find myself opening my laptop today with a different feeling. That one absolutely misted me up when I read that. That was the exact point of why we did this work. So that's it. I'm really happy to answer any questions about it, to share the resources and make sure that you can read the journals and get hold of the workshop materials, and happy to get involved in a discussion.
Thank you so much, Kay. That was, I've sort of spoken to you about this writing a few times, and I know just from you having inspired a lot of us in SHED to try these approaches, we learn a lot. I think they're very, very powerful, as someone had said, the quotes in there too. And it's nice to give us a little bit of hope after such a kind of brutal semester in summer. There's been a lot of chat and questions coming in, so I think we've got time for a couple of them. I think, Fran, I don't know if you want to come on the mic and just ask your question there.
Yeah. You got me?
Yeah, go ahead, Fran.
Okay. Yeah. I thought this was really interesting, and a lot of it resonates with postgraduates I used to work with before I retired. But I wonder, could you say something about how you said that some of the supervisors sort of kind of boggled at you when you suggested this? And I wonder if you could talk a bit about how you got them sensitized or involved in the process at all, or if you just wanted them to see that there had been progress and keep them away from it.
Yeah, and do you know, that's a really common question I get asked about this work. And one thing I think that really helped, which isn't really an answer for you or probably anyone else listening here, is that Sheffield, where I was when I did this work, had a really deeply embedded culture of professional development. It was something that had been identified at the top level as desirable, and for at all levels, people had really got used to the idea that professional development was a normal part of life. The hardest thing about this one was that people who, let's say, more into the STEM subjects, and I'm from a STEM subject background myself, couldn't spot the relationship between what we were asking people to do and their thesis, the things that they absolutely had to do, and the poor supervisors who were responsible for helping them to finish on time. It's a really highly pressured point right now. So I think the thing, like I've been able to explain to you today, we're mirroring a process. We're asking people to do this. We're asking people to build relationships. It's not about the product. It's about the habits and things like that. Really emphasizing that and trying to share quotes and things with them, again, as I have today. In subsequent years, so in the first year in 2015, we ran this just for PGRs. In subsequent years, we had their supervisors wanting to come in, and other people. We opened it up and said anybody who's stuck with any kind of writing can come to this. And I think once lots and lots of academic staff started coming along to this with their own pieces, that was something that kind of spiraled out from there. But I think the thing to focus on is the pedagogical devices for building good habits, not on the creative outputs themselves. Because if you read them, and some of them, they're not all silly, some of them are quite silly, some of them are very serious, some of them are really sad, actually, the pieces that come out. The aim of this isn't silliness in the product, it's the process that people are learning. So I think just to lean on that and be able to speak about that and why that links to what we know about writing and how writing is produced, I think is something important. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Kay.
I think there was also questions that sort of in David and Sarah's tie in with each other's, maybe about that idea of how we get into that mess in the first place. David, I don't know if you want to come on. Oh, I think you're on mute.
That's better. Kay, thank you. That was sensational. And that was sensational. Mike, you've got a way of helping people dig out. So my question, comment, thought was, how do people get into, how do we get our students into this mess in the first place? And how can we stop them getting into this mess in the first place?
Absolutely. And that was also on my mind a lot. And the way I approached my work in research and development was to learn from the students and then pull that back into supervisor sessions. And the whole supervisor series at Sheffield before had come out of what we were learning from students. So I think in terms of what gets them into that mess is unhelpful messages around people who are or aren't good writers. But also from leaving it way too late to start any writing, especially, again, speaking from my background, especially in STEM, to separate that writing up period. Here's where you do all the real work of research, and that's where the writing up just happens. Really positioning it as an active process of development and something that you have to learn, you have to develop, and you should start from the earliest phases of producing writing, even if it's annotating, read a thing, write a thing, annotating what you've read and putting that down and keeping track of that. Things
further, my 4, 9 and 10-year-old granddaughters do not have concerns about being bad writers. They just write. I mean, so at some point between the age of 4 and 21, something horrible happens.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, I think some of that as well is that even if we are writing in English, to write in academies is to write in another language, and some of the confidence drops when you start trying to emulate what you're reading and, trying to write too academically. And I noticed in the chat, people were saying, just speak it out, record it and transcribe it. Absolutely amazing. And what I've done with my thesis mentees is write in English first, write how you speak first. We can fancy it up afterwards. We can go through it and see what needs to change after that, but just trying to get that down. I think it depends as well. If you've got the kind of supervisor, and I know some people have, who share drafts of their work, say, you know, what do you think of this? I'm thinking of submitting this somewhere. What do you reckon? And include people in a collegial way in the development of writing. They tend to be more confident to share half-baked ideas and half-finished pieces back. If you're the kind of person who feels personally offended by receiving a piece of work with typos in it, that criticism, that heavy criticism, can stop people from wanting to share anything with you until they feel it's perfect. And given perfect isn't an achievable state for anything, you know, just what happens then is hiding. That lack of trust, people hide, they don't get back to you, they don't send things on time, they don't reply to emails. So, I mean, how many days have we got? Because I really could fly with this one for a long time, but yeah.
I'm just going to jump in there. There are lots of questions and suggestions in the chat, and particularly questions around community that I think are probably really important to flag up, as well as applying this to other types of writing. But I wonder if we could almost just pause them and move on to Keith and Alex, because I suspect that some of this can come out in the discussion around your work as well, and the work you've been doing at UHI. So thank you so much, Kay.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
You've got everyone going, and Alex and Keith, over to you.
Thank you, Katrina. Let me just see if I can get these slides up. Can I just check you can see those?
Yep.
Great, fantastic. My mind's buzzing now. I need to get into what we're supposed to talk about. We do a lot of work at UHI around trying to support staff to write their first educational research or scholarship paper. So, Kay, that was fantastic, and it's got me thinking about all kinds of things we might try and adopt in terms of your approaches. As Katrina said at the start, Alex and myself are joining you from University of the Highlands and Islands. We are based within our Learning and Teaching Academy, which is essentially university's hub for how we develop, share and recognise good practice in learning and teaching, but also in educational scholarship and research. And we were asked to come along and share some of our experiences of supporting staff and students to make the move to fully online learning and teaching when the pandemic struck. And we'd like to share some of those approaches, and in particular, some of the work that's starting to emerge out of those practices that we're now beginning to take forward. I'll give you a little bit of context around the University of the Highlands and Islands, first of all, just in case some folk will not be familiar with exactly how we're structured. We are a digitally and geographically dispersed university. We are made up of 13 academic partners and a central university office spread across the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, and covering a geographic area roughly the size of Belgium. We are also a tertiary university. We offer both further and higher education, and a lot of our work's concerned with transitions between FE to HE and then through to employment. Given our geographically and digitally distributed nature, we have particular approaches to how we think about and sort of deliver the curriculum, if you like. We have site-specific education. So if you want to study archaeology, you're probably going to go to Orkney, and if you want to do marine science, you're probably going to go to Oban. But we also do a lot of networked delivery. And our network delivery is based around the idea that you could be an undergrad or postgraduate student based anywhere within the UHI network and take any degree program that's delivered from anywhere else within the network. So you could be one of 2 students studying engineering from Orkney. Engineering will be delivered mainly out of Perth College, and you will join the main kind of cohort, plus little groups of students from all around the other parts of the network through video conferencing, and you'll do a lot of work in the VLE, and you'll also have local personal academic tutor support in the location where you're based. So while we don't do a lot of fully online learning and teaching, that's reserved for a small number of fully online distance programs, we do make a lot of use of blended approaches, and particularly video conferencing, to enable access to FE and HE within the region. We're a federated university, as I mentioned. We're made up of the central office and 13 colleges or specialist research centres. One of our challenges in UHI is how to develop and share good practice in a kind of holistic way when you've got 13 academic partners with their own cultures and histories and subject specialisms and their own management structures. So we take a values-based approach, and we spent a number of years developing a values-based learning and teaching enhancement strategy, which is non-prescriptive, but does give exemplars of how certain things might work in practice. And amongst those values, we've got some common sense things, but we've also got some more aspirational things like harnessing open education practices, providing connected learning experiences and so forth. Those values are threaded throughout a range of things that we do in the university, from informal CPD through to professional recognition and a whole range of other practices. And they're also the basis for what we do with technology in learning and teaching. We moved to a new virtual learning environment last year, and staff started teaching in it in September of last year. And to support that work, we developed some evidence-based benchmarks for the use of the new VLE, which weren't predicated on which technologies you use or the number of technologies you use. They were predicated on the extent to which our learning and teaching enhancement values were embedded in how the technology was being used to support a meaningful learning and teaching experience. So these benchmarks themselves, again, are non-prescriptive, so some guidance about the minimum information that should be in there that students might expect to see in their modules and programs. But beyond that, it's really up to the staff to determine what's appropriate for them. That is the right approach, we feel. However, having non-prescriptive benchmarks around the use of technology, when you're 6 months into using a VLE and something like a global pandemic hits, and you've got to move to fully online learning and teaching, it did present some challenges. In amongst those challenges was the fact that staff were still relatively new to the VLE. There was a range of things being done that were relevant to their own context and practice and students. But as we approached fully online learning and teaching, we realized that we had to quite quickly try and establish some sort of threshold that staff could aim for to provide some sort of standard and consistency in online learning and teaching support across our 13 semi-independent academic partners. There was other aspects to readiness as well. While we make a lot of use of technology and do a lot of network delivery, we don't do that much fully online delivery, despite what the perception sometimes is with UHI. So our continuing students did not self-select to study in a fully online mode. And even though they did have that crash course back in March through to June to help prepare them for this year, and our new students certainly didn't self-select to study in a fully online mode. And similarly, our staff, while well-versed in use of technology, still rely on a lot of classroom-based practices and themselves have not self-selected to teach in a fully online context. So some of the things that we decided to do immediately to address this challenge of a kind of threshold level of support across all our modules and programs was to try and introduce some simple but easy to implement and effective activities that could work in all module and program spaces within the VLE to get students to engage with one another and to establish a minimum level of support at the outset. So we had a focus here on activities and spaces that could be easily implemented, and it would balance and blend synchronous and asynchronous opportunities to learn, but which would also importantly support student self-organisation in those early stages of the move to fully online learning and teaching. And we realised that our students were immediately starting to cluster in all kinds of online spaces that were not necessarily anything to do with the technologies that we provided. So we came up with some recommended key activities, simple things that we thought everyone could easily implement within their own practice. One was a questions forum, so that if there were any general questions about what was being studied, or the coursework, or the COVID contingency arrangements, students could post questions there and the answer would be there for everyone. We recommended a simple virtual office hours session, at least one a week, using any synchronous technology that the staff member was familiar with using. And then a social announcements discussion board. This was specifically so that our students could tell one another where they were starting to self-organise in their own digital spaces. whether it was WhatsApp or Facebook or wherever else it might have been, recognizing that while there are strengths to VLE, the relationship between the student record system and the VLE structures who our students get access to, and makes it very hard for them to self-organize in the VLE, because we've already organized them into very kind of tight units related to modules and programs and so forth. For each of these activities, we gave our staff a starting point, some text that you could take and implement to immediately create that activity within their VLE spaces. And they could tailor it and put in the information that was relevant to them. But the approach was very much take these three things, implement them quickly, and then start thinking about the other things you need to do to support the students going forward. So they're just examples of the text that we provided the staff with to tailor and get those activities implemented. In relation to some of the early work, as we're moving beyond those immediate contingencies, we also developed some detailed guidance on things like large class teaching and moving that fully online, and making decisions about the types of synchronous and other technologies that could work well to support students in different contexts. And like probably almost every other institution, we started offering staff drop-in webinars looking at key dimensions to online learning and teaching that we need to be familiar with or get more familiar with very quickly. And that included things like how we support social and peer interaction online and create a sense of belonging to students who are studying in online contexts. And one of the things we pointed our staff towards was the sense of belonging in online distance learning toolkit that UHI and a number of other universities collaborated on and produced for the last QA Scotland enhancement team. But we realised there were difficulties and we needed to go further. And at that point, I will hand over to Alex.
Thanks, Keith. Are you going to move the slides along, or do you want me to share slides from my screen?
Whatever's easiest for you. I can keep these up if you just want to tell me when to move on.
Yeah, because I don't think I can do it from here. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Okay, so I thought it would be useful before I move on and talk about our response to COVID in relation to professional development and peer support, was to just briefly touch on what we were already doing in that area. And the reason that it would be good to talk about that first, I think, is to really kind of highlight the fact that we were a distributed university, and in terms of in terms of professional development and kind of mentoring and peer support, we already had to work in ways that was going to work for our distributed context. So in reflection of that, it was really important for us, and is really important for us, to design professional development, considering the kind of pedagogy that is learner-led, and encourage peer interaction, reflection, and prevent isolation. And isolation, I think, is kind of the key thing within our context, and in relation to COVID as well. And I'm going to come back and talk about that. It's always been important, because we're so distributed and spread out, that colleagues were able to join kind of workshops and professional development opportunities from their campus, and using technology that they could use within their kind of college, their home, or their campus area. So it's also really important that we used institutionally approved technology that participants were familiar with and are familiar with, and that they could potentially go on and use with students, or in future mentoring, or when presenting themselves. And that's all around kind of building that community of practice. Where possible, we've always tried to have our kind of learning activities and resources held online, and have facilitation that encourages critical discourse and reflection. What you can see on the slide just now is an example of a synchronous reflective workshop that I run with colleagues seeking HEA fellowship, and we use images, a little bit similar to Kay, in that images are a really good way about talking about yourself and your professional identity without kind of thinking about it too much in literal terms. So we use that, and we hold those resources online, so we don't send out paper copies or email. we run it through WebEx meetings, which is a technology that we use in teaching. One-to-one mentoring as well plays a big part in our professional recognition scheme, and it's carried out across campuses. And that's kind of recognizing that actually mentoring and getting a perspective from someone else out with your immediate context can be really, really beneficial in mentoring. So again, mentors need to be familiar with the use of the technology that they use in the mentoring, and they get familiar with that technology because we use it in the workshops, and being, in mentors being mentored themselves, they'll be familiar with the technology. Keith, can you flick the slide, please? Thank you. So what I wanted to kind of show in this slide is not so much kind of the breadth of what we do, but the scope that it has to prevent isolation. So I painstakingly put lots of dots on this map. It took me a long time before I discovered actually there's a far simpler way of doing it. But what I wanted to show actually is in relation to, so for example, up on the top right, you can see Shetland College there, and there's one little blue dot. So we run our professional recognition scheme twice a year. So we have a couple of cohorts a year, and you can imagine how potentially isolating it could be for that little dot up in Shetland in going for this professional recognition all on their own. So the point is, this little dot here, this person has been fantastic since gaining their professional recognition in engaging with mentoring and engaging very much in supporting colleagues in the move to online learning and teaching. And I'm going to come on to that. And again, so over here on the left-hand, well, my left-hand side in Newcastle College, a number of colleagues who, just a few though, few here, who gained professional recognition. They got their HEA fellowship, and then they got engaged in mentoring and running workshops, and being fully engaged, even though there's just a few of them over on Newcastle College. So you begin to see how we're kind of build up a community of practice for using technology, and how powerful technology can be for preventing isolation. Okay, so Keith, do you want to move the slide? Thank you. So just again, to very briefly touch on what we were doing before, in terms of professional development in technology. A lot of it was not directly about online learning and teaching, but some of it was focused on that. So I've just pulled out some of the activity that we were doing in this area. So Digital Education Week. That was a range of short sessions delivered synchronously, exploring different university-approved technologies, and particularly around building communities. And our student association, HISA, delivered a session on approaches to considering and meeting the needs of online and distance learning. And I think that's an important point in terms of what we do in these spaces and who we're involving in these discussions about how to make these spaces work for our students. It's really important that the students are contributing to these discussions and telling us and letting us know what works for them in these spaces. A synchronous teaching symposium. So this explores synchronous learning through synchronous technology. So it was a fully synchronous participation. So no in-person participation for that session or symposium. And again, professional recognition, although it's not directly relating to online learning and teaching, we see some really great examples of in technology enhanced learning and teaching practice coming through our professional recognition routes. And then finally, LTA scholarship. So we have a number of LTA scholarships each academic year, and we provide a small fund for colleagues to engage with small scale scholarship and research projects. And that includes sharing and evaluating best practice around blended learning and teaching. And then the move to Brightspace, which Keith has covered in his slides. Thanks, Keith. So I thought that was important to place the context. So we were going into COVID already familiar with how to do professional development over a distributed context. Our initial response, Keith has already touched on this as well, was around policy changes and updates, drop-in webinars, remote teaching resources, and own academic partner updates. So in my role as mentoring scheme coordinator, I was asked to think about what we could do to support colleagues in the move to online learning and teaching. And I don't know how you were feeling at that time, but for me, it was very much overwhelming in terms of the amount of information that was being kind of sent through email and other ways. But it just, all this information was really, really good and really useful and important. But it was really hard to kind of cipher through all the information that was coming through and find what would work for you. So I had to think about what wasn't on offer. And for me, reflecting on that time, it was about having a quiet place. So again, somewhere where you could come and it was, you know, away from the noise of everything that was going on, and that it was about individualized support and a space to let off steam and express worries and concerns that was without fear of judgment. And I think that goes back to what Kay was saying about having non-competitive spaces that they're not with no judgment. I had been kind of thinking about mentoring circles for some time. Hadn't had the opportunity to use them at UHI up to this point, but decided that actually a mentoring circle or circles would be a really good response and support mechanism for colleagues in response to COVID to support them through that. Keith, do you want to skip the slide? Thank you. So the idea of the mentoring circles were about moving beyond the standard guidance and approaches with a focus on harnessing the staff knowledge and experience and expertise and providing support that is directly relevant to the specific context and the needs of the individual. Thanks, Keith. Okay, so in terms of how these actually happened, I needed people to mentor. So I harnessed the mentoring scheme. I emailed colleagues who had mentored for our mentoring scheme, and also again through the HEA fellowship framework. And that goes back to the community of practice. So it's really important in the LTA that we are not just kind of throwing out professional development, but that we are building a community of practice as we go along. So we were really lucky in that we got some really enthusiastic colleagues willing to give their time to the mentoring circles. So we set them up. So small mentoring circles. So this is peer mentoring, peer group mentoring. So it's not one-to-one mentoring. It's a small number of mentors. So 2 or 3 mentors providing mentoring to a small group of up to kind of 8 to 10 people. What's most important is that it's led by the participants. So it's participant led. It's not about the mentors kind of telling colleagues what to do or how to do something, but it's about sharing their experience so the participants can find their own way through their challenges. Most importantly, and again, recognizing that that there were good things happening anyway with the drop-in webinars and those kind of support mechanisms. But most importantly for this, it was about confidentiality. So the webinars that we're running were fantastic, but they were recorded. As Keith said, there was also kind of this feeling that UHI is used to online learning and delivery, where in actual fact, there are a lot of colleagues who hadn't had that experience. And they needed a space to come together and feel that they could speak in a safe place. So it was really important that these were confidential. Collaborative and sharing. So the idea is that you know, it's not just about the mentors or just about the participants needing help. It can work both ways. So I'm going to come on to this, but one of the strongest things that came out of the mentoring circles was colleagues recognizing what they had to contribute and the good work that they were doing. And I think that feeling of being so overwhelmed kind of prevented people realizing the great work that they were doing. And progressive. So the idea was that we were developing ideas of practice over several meetings, and informal but developmental. And that's where the coffee meeting came in. And actually, that was something that was picked up by participants as well, that they came to these meetings because of the coffee cup and kind of signifying that it was going to be informal and relaxed, which is what people were kind of needing at that time, I think. Thanks, Keith.
Could I just come in, Alex, and just ask you to wrap up if that's okay? So we've got some time for questions for you.
Yes, sorry. Yes, I will do. Okay, I'll just very quickly skip on then. So these are the initial titles or topics that we covered at the mentoring circles. Keith, can you skip? And these are the quotes. We don't have time to read them, but the most important one to me was that second one about the fact that they've got knowledge that could help others without even kind of realizing it at the time. Keith, can you skip? And these are the topics that we're covering now. So in recognition that those mentoring circles worked and the evaluation was good, we're running some more now that are open to the sector. So if anybody is interested, then just let us know. Thanks, Keith. And finally, oh, sorry, this is the last one. Finally, also recognizing the kind of mentoring circles could work in other contexts. So we have rolled them out in a research project that we are doing with the University of Bhutan. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Katrina. Sorry for.
Yeah, no, and I'm sorry to cut you off, particularly, that sounds really interesting, that partnership at the very end. I'm sure that's maybe a topic for another day to explore further. Have we got any questions that are coming in? I can see there's some comments here in the chat box. I was struck by that last, something that came up just in the last few slides about humanizing the machine, which I loved. It sounded very radical. Any questions? Yes, Eva.
Thank you very much for your talk. I was really interested in how you struck the balance between sort of an informal space, a safe space, and also providing opportunities for development. How did you strike that balance?
I think in terms of the balance between informal and formal, I think that you can have informal spaces that are developmental, spaces where you can come and chat quite freely and in a relaxed way that is still developmental. So it's not that we're coming together and, you know, having a chat about what we were watching on TV, but it is a relaxed space where you can have a relaxed discussion, but about your work and how you want to develop it. So I'm not sure if that answers it, but it's kind of striking the balance between being relaxed and feeling free to talk about your challenges, but also how to kind of tackle those challenges and make them developmental.
Does that imply that you had a flexible approach to development itself? And it's very much an individually led one, even though it's supported by a community practice.
Sorry, in terms of the mentoring circles, it's relaxed in that it's individualized. So each person's needs or challenges are individualized, and their development, you know, they're there to support individual development. Whereas sometimes in I guess in workshops or bigger kind of professional development, you're working towards the same developmental goal, whereas the mentoring circles are about individual development. I feel like I've waffled a bit then.
I think that makes sense. Thank you, Eva. I wonder if, just to sort of bring in Kay and Keith at this point as well, is there was something very much in what you were all talking about around that support and that space to vent. And what I was touched by as well was with how much you all felt moved yourselves by the work that you're doing. And I wondered if you wanted to say any more about that, about how it kind of gave you value as a teacher in the process.
I don't mind coming in here briefly. Yeah, I mean, I think the whole process in terms of the work that we took forward, I think made us really kind of reflect quite deeply on what it is we are there to do in terms of not just supporting staff, because in many respects the staff are kind of the learners we support, if that makes sense, in terms of the professional learning and development. So it wasn't so much about how we support them, what we're there for. That was important, but I think a realization that actually a key role of the work we do is to bring to the surface and share the good practice that's already in existence. And it was really important to create spaces quickly and informally that kind of maybe replicate what happens when you're standing by the coffee machine at work or by the kettle and someone says, I tried this last week and it really worked. Now, with the best will in the world, all the guidance you might write in terms of things like moving to fully online and responding to COVID is not going to cover those individual niches and those individual contexts. So we need ways to have dialogue that draws that out and allows us to support one another, I think. And I think what underlines all this, there's no orthodoxy. There's no orthodoxy of how we teach in the classroom. There shouldn't be any orthodoxy of how we try and teach online. We need to do it in ways that are meaningful for us.
Thank you. Yes, I don't know, Kay, are you nodding there to come in, or are you just nodding?
I'm just agreeing, agreeing along. And I think in terms of my own emotional connection to that work is that I also lived that experience of being the person who had a terrible relationship with writing and felt awful about it, I think, in the first instance. But then secondly, if you look at what's happening to people is the disorientating dilemma and then being able to offer them not only that reflective discourse, but before that critical reflection for them, being able to say what you're experiencing, it's a thing, it's not you. And being able to say, like, have a look at this publication, have a look at these people talking about what you've experienced, and get them to really relate what they're experiencing to the theory, and it gives it a credibility with them before you get them into that. So yeah, I think I just really get misted up about transformational learning. That's me though.
And I think that kind of ties in with what we've been talking about almost in the course of this week across all the festivals. So yesterday, this idea of what principled means and how we retain it, and then the importance of the kind of the conversation, which was really strong on Monday as well. And it's kind of a very hopeful way, I think, to end the semester. I really do. We've got another couple of minutes. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in with a question. We've got various resources and ideas being put into the chat. A question from Rosalina. I don't know if you want to come in to ask your question. I might just read it out in case Rosalina has a problem with her mic, but she's asking Keith and Alex about your values-based approach, and where are those values the kind of grounding guidelines?
Very briefly, yes. So those values, we negotiate those values through consultation with our staff and students, find something that we felt would work across the whole 13 partners of the university. They're embedded in a range of the things we do, including professional development, and they're embedded in those benchmarks for making effective use of technology. But beyond that, we also have values that are associated with mentoring that we're very much driving the work that Alex was leading. I don't know if Alex wants to say something very brief on those mentoring values.
Only that last academic year, we decided that we would create a mentoring policy, guide of policy, forgotten. And actually it was really good to have chats with Kay about her own kind of work in mentoring on that, within our policy of mentoring, there are 5 values that we hope that all our mentors and mentees role model, or we expect them, and we've aligned them to various strategy, including the Learning and Teaching Enhancement Strategy values, the UK PSF, and the VTI Researcher Development Framework. That's it. Sorry, I'm conscious of time now.
Thank you. I know we're on to 1 o'clock. I feel like I'm always cutting you off. I'm being bad cop here. Well, just it's 1 o'clock. Thank you all so much for coming along and joining in with such enthusiasm as ever. And Kay, Alex and Keith, thank you so much for a brilliant midday break. And yeah, enjoy your afternoons, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much, Katrina. Thank you to everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording now.